Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Get Smarter, an LCE podcast. In a few prior episodes of our podcast, we've discussed the need to engage the people, regardless of what change, transformation, or improvement you're trying to effect. In this panel discussion, our first for Get Smarter, we're digging deeper into how to recognize and respect the need for a structured approach to managing the people side of change, and what can happen when you don't. So we'll be providing our listeners some, let's call them the golden rules of embarking on a change. I've got three special guests with me today. First of all, we're going to welcome Randy Heisler, Charlotte Anderson, and Mark Kneep. Let me tell you a little bit about these three folks. Randy Heisler is a vice president for the Reliability Consulting Group at Lifecycle Engineering. Prior to joining us, he spent 25 years in the steel industry and brings his experience to maintenance reliability and change management to help customers improve performance. Charlotte Anderson is a learning and development subject matter expert here with Lifecycle. She's got more than 20 years professional development and learning in design, organizational development, and instructional design systems. She is our lead developer of learning and change management solutions that change behavior and produce results. And last but definitely not least, our special guest, Mark Kneep. Mark spent 40 years in the industry with Fortune 500 companies. His major focus was on reliability, maintenance, improvements. He was a former project manager and project leader that worked with Lifecycle Engineering and was able to execute and sustain reliability excellence principles at his organization to make that huge performance improvement. So welcome everyone. Say hello to our audience.
Hey, everybody.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. All right, so Charlotte, we'll start with you. For our listeners out there that may or may not be familiar with change management processes and models, since you're our learning subject matter expert, can you summarize some universal truths of change and about the various models for changing behavior?
Sure. Thanks, Tara. Anytime we ask people to change behavior, there's a consistent set of phases they pass through before the change can be considered successful. First, they need to acknowledge and have a shared agreement of the inadequacy of the existing or the status quo. Second, they have to accept that there's a new way that will be an improvement. They need to recognize and manage the types or sources of resistance to change. And believe it or not, these are pretty commonplace and predictable. Next, to transition through the chaos or that messy period and integrate the new way. And finally, how to sustain the new status quo. So there are plenty of good change management models to help organizations prepare, execute, and sustain the change. The model you use is less important. It's understanding what experiences folks are going to go through that matters. I like to use the analogy of a trapeze artist. When you think about it, the stage is set, so to speak, and we're asking folks to step off the platform and grab a bar, and the person throwing the bar is new to them. So they don't know if this person knows what they're doing. They don't know if they can trust them. They might even be doing something with that trapeze that they've never done before. And they're probably doing it in front of people they know and are afraid to fail in front of.
Right, there's a risk there.
Right. But the fact is, you can't hold on to both trapeze bars at the same time. So in order for change to be successful, one of the most important pieces is that there's an acknowledgement that we're going to have to stop the old way at some point and go completely to the new way. And that sustaining is hard for lots of organizations.
So I love the fact that you used a circus type analogy. I think we could go with that because going through change can, especially that chaos phase, could kind of feel like a circus. But just to summarize the model, so a dissatisfaction with the current state, some sort of liking or at least understanding or acceptance of what the new state should be, preparation for resistance, push through that chaos, the circus, and find ways to sustain the new state. So I'm going to throw out a question, and thank you for level setting us, Charlotte, on that piece. I'd like to throw out a comment to the panel, and if you could just discuss your reactions. So this comment is, my organization says they're going to start an improvement initiative, but that's the work management. That's what they're supposed to do, not me.
Yeah, can I go first, Tara?
Please. You make this easy
Yeah.
on me. I don't have to pull. Thank you.
No, well, I like the circus thing too, because sometimes it feels like that. But yeah, my first thought on that topic is, that I worked with a plant, and the general manager, was trying to affect change and transition to greater reliability. And so he was, let's call him the ringleader, okay? And he said something to me that I hadn't heard before, and because there was a lot of issues, there was a lot of people that weren't on board early on, and he said that the problem with this place is that we have a culture of optionality, and that can be a problem. Okay,
Yes.
so he had to. I mean, what that meant for him was that he really needed to work hard to send a clear message that this was not an option, right? And that
Hmm.
and try to communicate. We'll probably say that 1,000 times here, but just try to help people understand that we're doing this, okay, and we're
Hmm.
not turning back, and that's a big first step for a lot of folks, especially at the top leadership.
Absolutely. Mark, what do you have any thoughts? Any?
Yeah, I'd like to say that, any major initiative that any plant is or business is looking to undertake, if there's a human element that's involved in it, then it's like the big pink elephant in the room. It could be, and that's called culture. And you have to recognize that that is in play. I can't say that I really fully understood that when I first worked with LC from our location, and it was new to me, this whole culture change thing. But that is people deciding, am I going to, can I get excited about this change? There's something called the risk of indifference, and that's the location puts all this effort and money into this new concept, and people on the floor are indifferent. They can't get
Mm,
excited about it. They really don't care one way or the other whether this thing happens or not, and that's a terrible outcome after you've spent $1 million to bring in a new activity for a year to have folks not really care if it happens. And really, the speed of implementation of any project with a human element is determined by the culture. You may have a grand strategy ready to go, but the culture will determine how fast it comes in. Oh, if you use these change management concepts, you can speed up implementation. And it may even ultimately determine whether the implementation is even successful or what we used to call a false start.
a
That's what I'll
false
say about that.
start. No, I think you pointed out something, well, reiterated, Randy's a culture of optionality, but also that if you're in a certain culture where people perceive the change as something that's happening to them rather than something they're actively involved in. Charlotte, would you have anything to add to that?
I do. Thank you. And it thankfully dovetails well with both Randy and Mark's comments. What I think is interesting is that nobody said there was any cognitive or behavioral impediment to this change. Nobody says that people aren't capable of doing it or that they
Mm,
don't have the right resources to do it. I think the emphasis is on what does the workplace allow? And 2 points about that I think are curious. The first one is most folks of a certain age are accustomed to working in an environment where leadership says, you do this, and they do it. So they've been given a lot of direction and very little autonomy. But suddenly with change, we're saying, you know what? I'd like you to participate in this. I'd like you to have a stake in this. And there might be the absence of a little bit of authenticity in that for some leaders and for their workforce to believe that, really, do you want me to participate in this, or that's just something you're saying? And the other thing that we sometimes come across, particularly in the industries we work in, is that we've got a lot of folks who enjoy working with machines and information. And just this concept of adults having a reaction to change that can't be described by just do it is uncomfortable and sometimes lacks credibility with that audience. So they're not sure it's really a thing. And I think that's a big contributor sometimes to the culture being able to adapt.
And sometimes sometimes when you first bring up the change management, there can be a pushback. And I had it one time where I think it was the maintenance manager said, "We don't need that fuzzy stuff. Okay, we're making metal out here. Okay,
Right.
and we're just going to do it like Charlotte said. We're just going to tell people this is what they're going to do." And
Right.
and that turned out not to be real successful. But I will say that he later got on board in a big way. But it took some missteps, okay, before that happened. So it's a tough road, but it's one that I think we use the word focus, right? Stay
Mhm.
focused.
Right, and missteps cost time and money. I'm going to share just a little bit of the research and our experience, with the panel as well. I think what we're saying all together is there are going to be impacts of change. They're not optional and they're unavoidable, right? 70% of changes fail without managing the people side of change. That's the change management piece. That research has been consistent over time, over years, Randy, and I know you and I have looked at that research together a time or two and have not been surprised that it hasn't changed or even increased, um, and that people are required to for the change to move forward, and that their support, is vital to that success. So can we look at how we approach helping people through change at this using the same approach for everyone? So we've been talking about a little bit about the leadership. We've been talking a little bit about middle management. We've been talking about, the workforce at large, all levels of the organization. Um, can we use the same approach for all levels of the organization to help them through change?
I can make some comments there. Um, I'm thinking of back to our own rollout that we had many years ago, and the model that we followed uh, had us identifying almost 40 people that could be on focus teams and leadership teams, and that was hourly and salary. So it was a good mix. It was folks that kind of volunteered, mostly that they wanted to be a part of that effort. That was great. And
Excellent.
and really that was the first part where we raised everybody's awareness level of what was happening, why what was the business case for this to happen. And really what we were doing at that point was bringing everybody on board why this needed to happen. And what we were looking for is the desire level that was happening on those teams. And what we realized was some folks were really fired up about this, some were mediocre, and some folks really didn't. They just never got traction. But the folks that were highly curious and their desire level was high, we we gave them more and more responsibility, and those were the folks that really helped drive this through. And you can't just go to an organization chart and figure out who those folks are. They'll surprise you. These are folks that are curious and they want to be involved, and it's great if you can provide that mechanism where those folks can step forward and not be embarrassed and things like that.
Well, yeah, and it's
Yeah,
promoting, right, Mark? It's promoting those people that are on fire, right?
Yeah.
Because they can kind of spread that fire around a bit, right?
Yes, absolutely. And it's exciting as managers of the project to see those folks come forward, because then you can get energy from their energy. I
one
remember
thing that we find is really important for talent development and retention as well is to offer opportunities for growth. So this could be, this is perfect opportunity for people, like you said, that might surprise you in the organization to step up, and that gives them, the opportunity to do more and different things. Charlotte, any thoughts from you?
Yes, I was just thinking that regardless of where you are in the organization, those basic truths that we spoke about in the beginning, acknowledging the status quo is inadequate, that there has to be a new way, recognizing our individual resistances to change, and so on. Think about how those vary depending upon your vantage point in the organization. If you are an executive or a leader or person of influence, you have a different set of responsibilities and opportunities to impart the change, affect it, and help it be sustainable. If you're a middle manager, you have some execution of the change on one hand, but you've got the people management side of that as well. And if you're an individual contributor, you're managing your own personal reaction to the change as well as how it's going to affect the workplace. So people's adoption, I think, and recognition of change has a lot to do with not just the adoption and engagement, but also with their vantage point.
Right. And what information do they need to be successful in their role um, to support and drive or sustain the change? I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah, it's made me, Tara, it's made me think about like we said, we've got the folks that are on board, right?
Hmm.
There's a lot of folks that are not, right? So,
Right.
certainly made me think of something that it's so important to assess the resistance, okay? And almost in a sense, assess the resistors, okay?
Hmm.
And understand who they are, right? And then developing a very specific coaching plan for those folks, right? If you've got somebody that's on board, they need a different coaching plan, right? And maybe none at all, right? But those that have high resistance are going to need a significant, what we call coaching plan to help
Hmm.
them see what this means and try to get them on board.
Yeah, I'd like to say something at this point that dovetails with what Randy said, and that is, as you're working through the organization, um, there's such a thing as fear of embarrassment, and I have read that it's the biggest barrier to adult education is folks are thinking back to when they were embarrassed, I guess, being growing up and it wasn't any fun, and they're not going to go through it again. And so there's an approach with those folks, and usually it's one-on-one, and
Hmm.
you just help them get through that concern, because on the other side of fear can be fantastic things. And so you just help them through that. And that's not in a group setting. That's maybe just making yourself available as a facilitator for one-on-one settings, and then a person may confide in you that they don't understand their role in the new system. Maybe it's a CMMS system that they've not used. Maybe
Right.
they didn't even get training in it. Now suddenly they're panicked that they're going to have to use this system, and they're just not sure if they know how to do that. Their desire level is there. It's just they have an anxiety level to overcome.
I agree with that, Mark. I think that fear is the biggest reason folks become resistors. It could be, like you said, fear of embarrassment, fear of not being qualified, fear of being found obsolete, uh,
Yeah.
any number of things. But
Mhm.
the beauty about resistance, I think, is it's twofold. One is that humans are pretty predictable creatures, and people demonstrate pretty predictable behaviors. So if we see certain behaviors or can observe certain things, usually it's a pretty good guess what's causing that and what's behind it. And then there will be plenty of solutions for how best to help that person get through the change. And the other thing is sometimes those resistors are good at showing us, hey, have we really thought this change through all the way? Have we considered what else could go wrong that this person is mentioning or expressing a concern about? So while resistors aren't always the most fun people to be around during the process, there's definitely opportunities for managers to build their skills and for project managers to make sure they've thought through the change.
Yeah.
That's an excellent point, is when you don't want all the yes people, okay, on the team that's trying to help make the change, right? You need those, need some resistors to say, whoa, wait a minute, I don't think you thought about this, right? And they can actually be helpful.
Yeah, I remember some resistors there. We just need a little bit more education on this. Or the system still got some bugs in it. We need to work through all those. Well, you can spend a lot of time on that. And instead we were like, no, let's go on and implement. It's not totally perfect, but we're going to learn more by doing. So let's get started and get our feet wet. And then everybody realizes it's okay. It's not as scary as I thought it was, but you could spend a lot of time trying to get something perfect before you ever roll it out on the floor. And that just takes time. So,
Good point.
I think that's a great point. I mean, what I heard from, the panel is, you know, change is very hands-on, and although that there are some, common points of resistance like fear for that we mentioned, for example, um, but that is still an individual. It still will be, an individual potential variable to overcome, or at least various nuances. But that listening is key, and creating the room to try the change without fear of failure or reprisal, right? So we shepherd through that. And then what is good enough? It doesn't have to be perfect, but what's good enough to get us started, so that the new way becomes the new habit. So if y'all are good with moving on a little bit, I want to focus on the area that seems to be most challenging that we've talked a lot about so far, which is resistance, identifying and managing that. We have a couple case study examples that we pulled together for the panel to discuss, and we could discuss, more as well. But if we want to look at some like real life examples of large scale changes that we've been involved in, and why they were not as successful, as they could have as they could have been, so that we can take a look at some and explore some common reasons for why there was resistance to the new way, or why that change wasn't exactly successful, or why wasn't the organization able to sustain the changes. So the first case study is an occasion when the organization, this recalls what you were just talking about, Mark, when the organization didn't provide the why of an initiative. They didn't explain the problem that they wanted to fix, or what is that dissatisfaction with the current state? Why are we doing this now? And why should you care? Why do we not want that culture of indifference that just like this change is just happening to me? I don't have to be actively involved. So, what would be some reactions to that, that big change failure, if you will, that the organization didn't provide the why?
I'll make some comments there. And I always thought of it as like two different whys. One is the high level business case for why the initiative is being undertaken. And and those are things that affect the bottom line for the business and what have you. And so there needs to be a thorough understanding of that everyone needs to understand. And then there's the personal business case, and that's the answers the, well, what's in it for me? And what we found there was just major frustration at the individual level with the existing system. Um, we had a high injury rate that went with unplanned work. People were getting way too many calls at home at night and on the weekends, and people we're just tired, sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so you've got to make sure that everybody understands there's the business case is so much greater than just at the corporate level.
Yeah, I agree. I had a gentleman in an engagement, and he was a believer in what was trying to be done, but he had seen this as a gentleman named Simon Sinek, and I may not say that properly, but does some TED Talks and all that kind of thing.
Yes.
And he said, well, he did this whole talk, and the title of it was The Why. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, that's the problem here. We don't know the why. Okay. And so it kind of told me that, gosh, we really needed to focus on the, as Mark said, the with them. Okay. What's in it for me stuff, and why are we doing this? And even though I felt that we had done that, obviously, there were a lot of folks that didn't feel that way. Okay. They just didn't get why. Okay. They thought they were doing great. Everything was great. The company was actually doing quite well. They were making money. Didn't understand why we needed to do anything different. And at the end of the day, what that caused, because it was an uphill battle, was that it wasn't that they didn't get there. It just took a lot longer. Okay. So huge emphasis on, I agree with Mark, is helping people, understand the why, because if you don't do that, okay, in a sense, it's either going to take longer or it won't happen at all. But in many cases, it just slows down the process.
I can remember having the conversation on what's in it for me, and a general mechanic, stepped forward and said, you've missed a key item, and that is we hate chasing parts. We don't like riding around the plant looking and looking and looking for these parts. It may look like we enjoy that, but we don't. It's very, very frustrating. And he wanted to make sure we were making full note of that. And of course, planned work addresses that very, very nicely. But I love it when folks add to the personal business case with the things that are causing them major frustrations.
Right. And if you
Absolutely.
don't celebrate those successes, right, that
Yeah.
when all of a sudden, hey, the parts, we do have the parts. Okay. We have the parts this time. How's that?
Yay! They're
Right?
in a kit. Yes.
They're a kid. Okay. Those are just little things that can help get the why out there.
Yes, absolutely.
That reminds me of an experience. It was not a manufacturing environment, it was a corporate administration area. And I discovered that while it was a very procedurally dense set of responsibilities for the folks, there were no instructions anywhere. Nobody had written down any SOPs or anything like that. So if somebody were on vacation or unavailable or needed to share the workload, there wasn't anybody who could assist. So when I made the recommendation that we come together and kind of collect everybody's knowledge and prepare some of these processes, there was a good amount of resistance. And this was early in my career before I understood everything that was behind that. And the grapevine came back to me that folks thought I wanted to do this knowledge dump because I was going to eliminate jobs. And that is absolutely a legitimate fear many folks in the workplace have. But I thought, okay, I need to address that. So I said, I understand that this is a concern some people have, but I think we can do better here. I think everybody's job could be more pleasant and easier. And when you get back from vacation now and again, you won't have an enormous pile of work. And if that isn't enough, let's say the day does come when we have to close our doors or limit positions. Who do you think is most likely to be asked to stay? The person willing to share their knowledge and expertise and develop new skills and become agile, or the person who wasn't? And suddenly the change seemed like a great idea. So there
Yeah.
might be a why, but they have to believe the why.
Yeah. That makes me think back, and Randy, you'll remember this because y'all came in and used the term tribal knowledge. And we had so much knowledge that was concentrated in some of our older craftspeople, but they're a few years from retiring. And so this collecting their information, getting that into planned work, getting documented in the CMMS system, that was going to serve us for decades to come. Whereas tribal knowledge just slips out the door, and then it's like, well, how do we do this? Well, Joe knows how to do this, but he's been retired now. So collecting all that knowledge and getting that into CMMS was huge, and folks truly understood that and appreciated that.
For sure.
Definitely.
Mhm.
So I think we have some good change management practices to be able to capture and express that why. I love what Mark said about you have the business case, that comes from the corporate side, of things, but then you have the personal business case that radio station WIIFM, what's in it for me? Um, and Charlotte, I thought your comments were spot on. It's addressing again, it's finding that fear, of the resistance, and then or the reason for the resistance, and then trying to best address it. Um, Something that Mark was talking about too about tribal knowledge. So the next case study has to do with stakeholders and stakeholder involvement. So this case study is an occasion when informed individuals, people who are either going to be affected or impacted by the change, or all stakeholders weren't involved in designing the new processes or selecting the solution, and they become so skeptical and develop a mistrust of the leadership support or their ability to sustain the change. So could you speak to that about that importance of stakeholder involvement and inclusion? Kind of reminds me of what Mark said about having the focus teams being a very good mix across the organization.
I remember going into to a plant where they had just previously implemented a CMMS, computerized maintenance management system, and we were asked to come in to do some process development, on how they could better utilize it. And the thing that we first ran up against was everybody saying, well, if this is going to be like the way they did the CMMS, then this will fail for sure, right? I was like, oh my gosh, okay, so
Uh-oh.
the
Red
walls were
flag.
up. The walls were up. Okay, this is not going to work even before we got started. And the point was is that well, naturally, we started asking questions as well. What happened? Oh, well, the IT department implemented it. And I was like, oh, so they didn't ask you, how, how you wanted to use it, how it should be configured. You weren't involved. There was no, engagement at the floor level. And so therefore, that was a big problem. Okay.
Mm,
They just didn't, they didn't get involvement from what they tend to say in the IT world from users. Okay.
right.
And that's just, it just is that's an example, I guess, of where what it did was it made them skeptical, right, of anything, any change, okay? And bottom line was like, if they could say it clearly, it would be, well, we don't do change well, because that was the example that they'd seen.
Mhm.
Right.
That makes me think, Randy, I encountered a location, and as we got several months into it, they said, well, we're going to have a real challenge here right off the bat because our CMMS system it's just not any good. It doesn't work. And what we did was we kind of set up a Kaizen, and we brought in the vendor, their subject matter expert, and we just kind of put it all out there, what really wasn't working.
Mhm.
And at the end of 2 days, there was actually it was a pretty good system. It only had a couple of faults, and it was just more a matter that folks really had just never been trained on it thoroughly. It has kind of been dropped in place, and there was no change management when that happened years earlier, and everybody was just kind of expected to grab a hold of it and use it. And that didn't really happen. And I will tell you, within 2 months, this location went totally paperless and was using tablets. And so I just thought, what a jump they
Wow.
made from where it wasn't a good system to where they embraced it, and now they're using tablets. I actually said, now you guys have shown me that you can do anything. If you can do that, the rest of this is going to be uh, an easy journey for you.
Yep, duck soup.
Yeah.
But when you think about it, isn't that how adults typically respond to things? I know that if I had to do something, a significant portion of my job differently, and my boss just dropped it in my lap, that would really affect my engagement in that and my support of it. And it might even affect other things like my relationship with my supervisor. And
Right.
if I don't have the chance to contribute to it, I think the company may have lost an opportunity to get a lot of good information. What did I think the problems were that needed to be solved? What's my experience been with this problem in the past? What solutions might we be able to explore? That automatically builds engagement. And I think that it's an overlooked opportunity to get folks involved when we don't consider people who are affected by a decision.
Yeah. I think it's another opportunity to mention fear of embarrassment again. You don't really call that out for anybody and say, "Oh, I see what's going on here. You have some anxiety." You just realize as a facilitator that that's what's going on here. That's what we're going to work through, but we're not going to call it that or anything like that, and just help them through it and get them through it. But you sure wouldn't want to say, "Oh, well, I see what is in play here," because I just wouldn't. You just don't go there with adults, but know that it's in play.
Yeah, work the solution in a sense, not the problem, right? It's
Yeah.
I like that. I like that phrase. Work the solution, not the problem. Well, what about those occasions where you or where leaderships don't weren't able to see the problems or weren't able to anticipate or respond to that resistance successfully? What do you think are some either symptoms of that or ways to try to mitigate that when the folks who are in charge of shepherding their people, through the change, either don't acknowledge it or aren't adequately or effectively responding to the pockets of resistance clearly showing themselves.
Okay, I'd like to comment there. As you've involved the early adapters and you've got them online and you're
Right.
starting to started, you're going to start to see some successes. And
Ah,
and part of change management is highlighting those successes and having your location manager highlight those successes in front of the masses and praise that this is what the new change has brought us. And then some of those folks that are resistors, that will help them along because they'll look at it and maybe interact with the folks that were involved in that to understand exactly what happened. And you'll get some attitude change there later on that they are like, no, that's pretty neat. I did not know that was part of the package or something. So
right.
that's part of it too, is making sure that successors are being communicated and celebrated. And and if that can happen at the plant manager level, fantastic.
It's a positive peer pressure, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So, yeah.
yeah, but when and when you're successful there, that's great. But when you're not successful, right? And sometimes it's fear of confrontation. Okay, that you've got a supervisor that knows there's an issue but doesn't confront it.
Ah, mm-hmm.
And they would just rather look the other way and or they weren't really and I'm going to jump it up to the leadership level is that they sponsored this but they weren't active, right?
Ah,
So in a sense, they are ignoring the resistance that's still out there, okay? all the things that Mark talks about is focusing on trying to get one by one to get that resistance to go away. But if it's not been anticipated that you're going to have that, and then on top of that you ignore it, you've really got big trouble. So I think I said it earlier, is that it's very important to understand the resistance, okay, and in a sense assess it so that what to expect. Sometimes you can be fooled a little bit by thinking, oh no, Joe will get this, but then Joe is silently resisting, right? And you don't know it. But yeah, I had a maintenance manager one time that and I was on the ground and I was coaching this guy to do what he needed to do to move his organization forward. And I was coaching and coaching and coaching, and it wasn't happening. Okay, he wasn't doing the things that he should do, and the leadership of the plant um, weren't paying close enough attention, or they'd have seen it. Okay, so really, it put us in a position where we had to let them know. Okay, that there's an issue here that must be addressed, because they just weren't aware of it and they weren't planning for it. They thought that this person was going to be leading this thing, and that would be the least of their worries. But as it turns out, that one of the key people in the organization wasn't, doing, what wasn't getting his people to do the new things, okay, that needed to be done. So, yeah, it's hugely important that we're actively sponsoring and seeing what's happening or not happening in the initiative.
Yeah.
Right. Not just the window dressing, right?
Correct. Yep.
That's really where the plant manager has got to be. I think I heard earlier, 70% of the motivation is going to come from leadership. And for me, it's the plant manager, the location manager. They're leading the charge. They're determining what is important, what needs to be worked on. They're sponsoring the effort, um, and and really, I mean, I could leave a location and know what the level of enthusiasm was in the plant, sometimes just based on that plant manager's posture and their level of excitement.
Wow. Hmm.
That's right. Mark, you probably heard me say this more than once, that people do what makes their boss happy.
Yeah.
I
So,
think we have to recognize the leadership part of this concern. And I would guess a vast majority of people in a position of influence or authority never received any training or education in this regard. So, one of the first mistakes I think most companies make is to fail to recognize the leadership that is involved with proper change management, and that these are not skills that most people come into their job possessing. That we really, nothing about change is unpredictable. So if we fail to anticipate it's probably because we didn't plan very carefully and equip people in order to execute it and carry it out.
Great point. I think that speaks back to what we discussed earlier in the podcast about optionality. Now, those were, from different, maybe the people who are going to be the executors, of the change. But we also have to equip our leaders and our managers on their responsibilities, in terms of what they can do to direct and sustain that change. I'm sorry, Mark, you were going to say something?
Um, I'm thinking back again to just culture and the pink elephant, and I'm thinking of something a business guru in the 80s. His name was Peter Drucker, and he said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And if you really think about it, it does. You can have a fabulous strategy that you've bought into, and the plant manager is putting all their energy into that. But culture is a beast, and it will ultimately determine whether this is a transformation or another project of the month. And
Yeah.
nobody starts any initiative and wants it to be the project of the flavor of the month. Everybody wants their change to be a transformation, but if they don't recognize change management, they may just be teeing up another flavor of the month. And if the organization they don't want to get their hopes up for another flavor of the month. They're tired of having their hopes dashed, and they're putting their confidence that management will sponsor it through. And so again, that's what kind of
Yep, I've
reminds me.
seen them come and I've seen them go.
7 out of 10 is a strong number,
That's
but that
right.
also means, and people are going through lots of changes. There's an element of change saturation, that's involved there too. Oh, great. Now I have to get ready for another change. I mean, that's a major form of resistance to be anticipated, recognized, and dealt with.
Mhm.
Charlotte, I could see you're about to say something.
Well, it just makes me, it just reminds me that it's not, nothing we do in the organization happens in a vacuum. Every time we do something, it's occurring within a set of experiences that the employees have had, or recent history, or long held beliefs. So we have to recognize what's existing when we try to introduce the change and say, what might we expect from this? I mean, something as basic as generational differences. We typically see that there are differences in the generations when it comes to perceptions of authority, resistance to change, or adoption of change, or seeking variety in the job, and so forth. So I think we need to stop sometimes and recognize that this is happening in an existing ecosystem, and what are some of the relevant factors there.
I wanted to make a comment, and when I first heard about reliability excellence and change management, I was 50 years old. That's when I met Randy, and I had never heard about change management, so there's probably a little fear of embarrassment possibility there. But I got as they raised my awareness level on reliability excellence, I just got more and more and more and more excited about it, and and I still look back on that as a real neat career highlight. And anything that I've said in the last half hour, I didn't know that before I met you all. So again, it was a great opportunity for me.
Love you, man.
Well, no, thank
It
you.
was,
Thank you for sharing that because I do, I mean, I think as like reliability excellence is such a journey. And having the change management piece integrated, I mean, that's why we're talking about it today. Um, I think I have one more case study that we're going to dig into, which is sustainability. So I wanted to talk a little bit. We've been talking a lot about planning for change, about resistance management, so important, about stakeholder involvement, so important. I want to talk a little bit about sustainability, about after you've done all of the exciting work and you've you started implementing the reliability excellence processes or your work management processes, your storing processes, your reliability engineering. Then it comes down to keeping everything going. Um, there's been some challenges that we've experienced as we work with organizations over the years. Maybe there's a lack of direction. Maybe there's a leadership change, and some of the old ways have come back in and replaced the new state. Potentially, not holding people accountable or um, insufficient resources maybe, or maybe discussions with different departments where things just aren't working right. What would be some, I guess, some thoughts or some guidance or even some more reasons for why change couldn't be sustainable and some tips for our listeners on what does a sustainable change look like, feel like?
yeah, I think you've covered several of them, right? Which is it's like, hey, let's make a list of the pitfalls, right? And the one that I see a lot is that it's basically it's a factor of speed, okay, of implementation, not getting things in place fast enough, and then there's leadership changes that occur, and there's loss of focus, and so there's a lot of minefields, okay, along the way because these things don't happen overnight, right? So it takes some time. So those are always out there. But I think to me, it always comes back to, making sure that the folks that are probably going to be there the longest, in many cases, are not the leadership. Okay, they get promoted, they move on. So you've got that minefield, and
Hmm.
the way to overcome it that I've seen work best is simply making sure that everyone is educated. Charlotte's talked about it several times, is making sure that people are educated enough and have the knowledge to do what was put in place, and they keep doing it because it's good, right? And it's been helpful,
Right.
and they see the benefit from it, so that even if leadership changes, it carries on, right? It doesn't have, the leader of the plant isn't the one making it happen anyway. They're supporting it, they're doing all the right things, but at the end of the day, it's the blocking and tackling that takes place on the floor. And if you can keep that going, okay, then you lower your risk, okay, of it not being sustained. And I'll just make one more comment, is that the thing that I think is helpful there as well is measuring, okay, the progress, okay, and having metrics in place or key performance indicators that keep driving the organization to be successful, regardless of leadership changes or other things that happen.
I would like to
Maybe
say that makes me think, Randy, of when companies don't plan for it to be successful. They're not prepared when it works out. For example, let's say that you implemented some changes on the production floor and now productivity was very efficient and the use of raw materials was efficient. So now you're either overproducing the product and you don't have any place to put it, or people are standing around with nothing to do because they've already produced what we were expecting it would take us several days to do, we were able to do in a much shorter period of time.
Oh, so it went too well.
It went too well, and we weren't planning for that. And I just think it's so common, but it happens a lot that we don't think what's the landscape going to look like when this change is in effect and it's working well. I had a situation one time with a call center, and they had call center representatives who took a long time with the customers, and customers were frequently calling back because they weren't getting a solution. So they thought that they needed better equipment and better training for their folks. They needed kind of a higher caliber, more experienced customer service person. And when they did that, and the call volume decreased for repeat calls, and the call time decreased, then what did they discover? They don't need as many customer service reps. So suddenly people became less skilled at their job so that they had a better chance of keeping their job. And that's what certainly wasn't the desired outcome. But if instead they had prepared for people to develop and to get better, then they'd have a whole bench of folks ready to be deployed in other places of the organization. So they hadn't anticipated success, and that's unfortunate.
Mhm.
Interesting.
I think the key word on this particular question that comes out for me is just that we want to institutionalize the changes to where people are not going to give them up. They like the new change. And I think back to our initial kitting area, which was very good. We just, through continuous improvement, plan, do, check, act, we just made it better and better and better. And I think of PDM technicians. Initially, that might have been contracted out, but within a few years, we had 8 PDM techs. These were electricians and mechanics, and they became subject matter experts at uh, UE and vibration and ultra, everything on the PNF curve. And even in lubrication, we had folks that got certified in that area. And so these folks just got stronger and stronger. And even some of our folks, we started proctoring the CMRP and CMRT exam at our location. And ultimately, we had 28 people pass the CMRP exam or CMRT. We even had folks that we sponsored them to go to the SMRP conference. I mean, these are huge things, but we just kept those things. I mean, those were grand things to put in front of folks who never thought they would have those kind of opportunities in their work career. So it's a journey that really doesn't ever have to say, well, we're done. We just kept making more things available.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Once you get it institutionalized, then it doesn't go away.
Yeah.
Right.
Once the person behind you doesn't toss you that old trapeze bar, you can't go back.
Back to the circus.
You
Right.
know,
Yes.
I
The
will
greatest show on earth, right? The greatest
let
show
me
on earth.
let me just close with this thought. I mean, really, with reliability excellence and planned work and finding things early on the PNF curve, we found that one of the biggest deliverables was our mechanics electricians were working in a safer work environment. Planned jobs are safer by a 10x factor because there's a reduction in error traps. And I did the math on it, and we figured out over a 10-year period that we had 70 craftspeople that weren't injured. And I can't tell you what that injury might have been because it didn't happen, but it might have been horrific. And everybody in the craft organization, they knew that. These were folks that had had first aid injuries or more serious injuries, and they weren't having them anymore. And so that was a huge what's in it for me, for them.
Excellent.
Good point.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to thank all of you so much. We've had so much great information today. I just want to, for our listeners and our panel guests, before I ask you all to give us one final thought to share, I'll just summarize a bit what we've talked about today. So first of all, the importance of the how. We'll give Simon his due, the business case from a corporate level, but also that most important, the what's in it for me, the personal business case, and making sure that is understood in a hands-on activity to help people work through resistance to change. That education for appropriate to the role for their responsibilities in effecting, delivering, and sustaining the change. So roles across the organization. Um, Highlighting successes, not having to be perfect, but for having tried and for having gotten some positive results, and that can have a positive peer pressure, a result to get more people on board for the change and hit that tipping point, where the organization is all moving forward with the change. Um, Regarding resistance, important to understand and assess that so that you can prepare and address that. I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but golly, it did. That the plant manager needs to be that active and visible sponsor for the change, and not just do the window dressing, but be the ringleader, be the ringmaster for the circus that will ensue through change. And then to plan for success, to plan for sustainability, to have measurements in place for success, and to keep them and to keep setting the bar higher so that you can sustain that change and make it institutionalized. That just becomes part of the fabric of the organization, becomes how this is the way that we do things. So then it's not so easy to backtrack. um, I just want to thank you all so much, Charlotte and Randy and Mark. I'll do a little around the room if there's any departing thoughts you have for our listeners on this subject. Please share maybe some hopeful advice. Charlotte, I'll start with you.
I would recommend that folks look to history briefly before embarking on a new initiative. take a look at how well your organization's handled new things in the past. What stumbling blocks did they encounter with change, and what can you do so that those don't recur?
All right, Mark, you're up next.
I would just say that these are universal skills that you can take you anywhere as you learn change management techniques, as you learn the reliability uh, skills, and perhaps get a certification. I mean, folks out there are looking for this, for all of this. There's actually a shortage of this, and the competitive advantage that goes with reliability excellence, it's out there for anybody to take advantage of, and it's huge. And so, but I was also by thanking LCE for the opportunity to learn more about this years ago, and it's just been a great experience for me. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. And Randy, we'll finish up with you.
Well, I'll make it quick. I'm going to say culture change is hard. And sometimes the change is slow or slower than you want it to be. But, always remember, when you're doing this, it's not the technical aspects. Okay. Those are easy. Okay. The soft stuff is the hard stuff.
Well, thank you all so much. And thank you, listeners, for joining this enlightening and practical discussion on change in the industrial workplace and others. Charlotte brought some other different industries and thoughts from changes that she's been a part of in the past. So for our listeners, if you'd like to explore more about this topic, head to lce.com, head to this podcast recording, and we'll put some resources in the comments for you. Thank you for my panelists for joining me today. Until next time, listeners, let's stay smarter, people.